Welcome to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast.
Supercharged by Amped Outdoors Lithium.
Today, anglers fish longer. Today, anglers fish harder. Today, anglers rely more than ever on their electronics. It all comes down to catching more fish, and today, anglers rely on Amped Outdoors lithium batteries, period.
Catch more fish. Learn tips, tricks, techniques, and secrets. And decades of angler's wisdom. Welcome to the show.
Oh, yeah! Yeah! Oh! Oh, that's a nice one. Yeah!
Welcome back to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast. Sorry about that intro. I need to go in and cut that volume down a little bit. How's everybody doing today? Happy New Year. Hope everybody had a great New Year's Eve and starting the new year off great. So today we have a guy that came out with me a couple of years back with three of his buddies, and never kayak fished before, was just kind of getting back into fishing. And so they came out. Anyways, long story short, I'll let you guys talk to him and listen to the story. But it became an obsession that keeps him up at night. And of course I get messages because I totally understand all that. So let's go ahead and bring on Chris Volle.
Hey, Chuck.
Hey. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. So why don't you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so started fishing. Well, I started fishing at a really young age, around 5-6 years old, primarily with my parents and family members, and wasn't really passionate about it until I was old enough to kind of go out by myself. I lived in a rural area, and so around, 12 or 13 years old, when I could start going out to these farm ponds and bodies of water that were within walking distance from where I lived, I kind of developed a passion for fishing. And then three of my really good friends, really best friends, some of us have been best friends since we were 6 years old. We all kind of got hooked, if you will, on fishing. Really, we fished a lot all the way up through our 20s. And then, life kind of happened and we all split apart and started doing our own thing, moved away from the area. And, a couple of years ago, when I moved to Northern Ohio, I happened to see Chuck one day at a gas station. I don't even know if I ever told you this or not, Chuck, but I saw you carrying some kayaks, and I saw your advertisement on one of your kayaks that said Lake Erie Kayak Fishing Guides. And I remembered that one of the guys had started kayak fishing, and I was following him on Facebook, one of my buddies. And so probably, 2 years later, maybe, we happened to get on a phone call, and he started telling me about kayak fishing, and I told him about you. And one thing led to another. We ended up, all four of us, reconnected. We hadn't been together as a group, I think, for almost 25 years, all four of us together at the same time. And they all came up here, and we spent the weekend. Well, we did a 2-day kayak fishing trip with you. It was phenomenal. And that kind of really, re-energized my passion and got me back into it. I was buying gear within a few more. Yeah, there's a picture of us right there. Went out and bought some gear, and started river and, bank fishing on Lake Erie. That just wasn't doing it for me. And I think it was around August of that year, I went and bought a kayak, and it's just been a progression since then, you know?
Yeah, that was the Old Town Big Water 132 that you were in the first time that you came out.
Yeah, I think that was day one. By the end of day one, I felt like I was an expert. You know, when we went out on day two, well, then we went out on Lake Erie day two, and it was a pretty smooth day when we went out that morning. And then I was getting pretty confident, so I kind of drifted away from the group. I don't know how far offshore I was, but
what had happened, and it happens a lot in group trips. It's, you know, my trips are based around comfort, and the other three guys, they didn't want to leave the shoreline, and you know, I knew that the fish were quarter mile, half mile off the shore. I knew they were there, and Chris was like, "Hey, I'm good. Let's go." You know, and I turned to your buddies and I'm like, "You guys good?" They're like, "Yep, we're gonna be fishing these rocks over here." So that's how we ended up.
So it started getting rough, and or not rough. It seemed rough to me. It was probably, I don't know, what were it, foot maybe foot waves, something like that, 1.5 feet.
Yeah, maybe a foot, maybe.
Yeah, it seemed like 7 feet at the time. You know, being a new kayak fisher, right? Fisherman, but something happened. I think I fouled my line up or something, and you said, "Here," you gave me another rod, and you said, "It's getting a little bit too choppy. Why don't you go ahead and head in, and I'll fix your rig." And so I headed in, and I was like, I don't know, I was like just tooling around in the water, trying to figure out how you should hit the waves and the way that the boat would get carried by the waves. And I don't know if a boat went by, or perhaps it was just a little bit of a rogue wave. It probably wasn't even a large wave at all, but it seemed like it was, you know, 6 feet high. I looked to my side, and the next thing I know, I was kind of airborne, or at least in my movie, I was airborne. And the kayak was upside down, and I was in the water. And I don't know, the water temperature was probably low 60s at the time. But I sucked in a little bit of water and started gasping and was coughing. And very quickly, I realized how insignificant we are when we're in Lake Erie. And I immediately got a tremendous amount of respect for that body of water. And, you know, you got to me really fast. I'm guessing probably within a couple of minutes, maybe 2 minutes. Which it felt like it was 15, you know. And when I bobbed up and I saw you, I was so relieved. And you came up to the boat and said, I said to you, have you ever had anyone fall out of a kayak before? And you were just stone-faced serious, and you said, "Never on purpose." And then you kind of grinned a little bit, and I knew at that point I was going to be all right. But I was sweating it for sure. And then you helped me get back in the boat, and you know, we finished out the day, had a great day, had a great trip, and you know, for the first probably 10 days or so after that, I had nightmares, and, you know, all these thoughts went through my head about what could have happened if I hadn't had a PFD on, you know, all the worst things that could have possibly happened. And right. I've told you this before, but me falling out of that boat that day was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because it taught me respect for the sport and respect of safety gear. You know, you can't, you know, I hear these guys talk about, you know, not wearing a life jacket because they're in 4 or 5 feet of water. And my rule is, if I'm in that kayak, as a matter of fact, if I'm around the water, I'm wearing a life jacket. Just because, you know, a tree branch falls out of a tree and hits you in the head, you don't have a life jacket on and you get knocked out, you're not going home that day.
You know, that happened to one of my buddies, Adam Frazier Pross. What's the name of his podcast? He's over on the other side of the pond. I was on his podcast a while back. He was fishing a creek, and you know, Widowmaker came out of the sky and messed him up pretty good. But he's recovering really well. But it's funny you say that.
Did he had a PFD on, I suppose, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. who knows? He might not have made it if he didn't. I shared with you, I think I shared this with you the last time we were together, but this summer I was up at Sandusky Bay, and I was I'd unloaded into this on this pretty steep ramp.
Mm-hmm.
And I had launched there several times before. It was very comfortable. It was early in the morning, just about daylight. Nobody else was around. And I put my PFD on and went to go get in my boat. I was 2 steps in the ramp, and I thought I was on this kind of like non-skid grating that they had on this ramp. And turns out I wasn't. And my feet both went right out from underneath me. I caught myself on my elbows, and my PFD caught me also. I didn't really think much about it other than, the pain that I was in. I got in the boat and got out and started fishing. And then later on, I realized, I went all the way down into the water completely. I mean, my life jacket picked me up. That's how slick it was. I was, in probably 7 or 8 feet of water really quick. And later on, I realized if I hadn't had on my PFD, and a lot of guys I know, they leave their PFD on their boat until they get in it and they get situated and then they put it on. I would highly recommend against that, because if you slip and you fall and hit your head, it's another situation where, it's lights out.
Right. Yeah. I remember that story. Excuse me. It's happened to me a couple of times, and I generally don't have my life jacket on until I climb in my kayak. I tie it to the dock, and when you sent me that message, it really made me think about it. Sometimes you can slip pretty easily, you can hit your head, and then what happens? You go in the water, you're unconscious, nobody's around, right?
Yeah.
So it was an incredible point. Which one thing that I definitely wanted to point out before we get too far is Chris is without a doubt my number one student. That's how I introduced this guy, because he's just he's taken my lessons and went above and beyond with them. But I remember us talking about you slipping, and a while back I slipped, and it hurt pretty bad, and I'm like, screw this. And I went in my ice fishing gear and I dug out my cleats, just the rubber cleats that go on the shoes, and I put them on my sandals, and they worked, and kept me from falling. So I keep those in the truck at all times for any kind of slippery boat ramps, frozen or, middle of the summer.
Yeah, that was a great suggestion. I went out and bought a pair actually when you told me about that. I don't think I've been out since I bought them, but I'm gonna put them in my boat and keep them for when I need them.
Oh yeah. So when you flipped over, I remember, because you're pedaling in and I had the Torpedo. So I'm kind of holding position, trying to untangle the rod. I think you got it like I think it was bird nested or something. No big deal, it just takes a second to fix it. And I heard something. I looked up and the kayak's upside down, and I'm like, oh God. Put the thing back there. I think I was dragging a little bit of fishing line on the way and just motored over to you pretty quick. And it's always a deer in the headlights look in that situation. And I believe that you were the first one that ever flipped over on me.
Yeah.
So it was.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah. And I don't know if you remember this, but, I had that radio. I had one of your radios, and right before I flipped, I was having issues with the radio. It wasn't working. And you came over and you did something to get it working again. And when you gave it back to me, I didn't tether it to my life vest. And so when I went off, it went in the water. Now it was floating. You were able to go get it. And quite frankly, I was so panicked when it happened. I forgot that I had a whistle and I forgot that I had a radio. I just started yelling your name, which there's no way you could have heard me at that point. But
oh yeah,
it was a great just scenario for me to be in, because I learned even though the water wasn't below 60 degrees, I learned kind of what that cold water does to your body. And, it took me a good minute to just catch my breath and figure out how to breathe and, really kind of get my bearings. And, afterwards, you and I have had multiple conversations. And of course, you've instilled in me to be calm, always. That'll save your life, right?
Yeah.
But until you've gone through that initial panic, you really don't know what to expect.
Exactly. So. If I remember correctly, I want to say the water temp was like 63, 64 degrees.
Probably.
So it was still enough to just kind of jolt you. And, if you don't know what you're doing, you could be in a bad situation. And that's why I do what I do, is just to get you guys out there, and I'm your guardian angel. I'm always watching. And most of the time, I'm usually radioing over, don't lean too far.
Yeah.
And but it brings a certain awareness to the lake. Like you said, it was a very important experience for you, and I've been able to see it like from an outsider, because you've transformed into, like I said, my best student. You nobody takes safety as serious as you, and you promote it, and you talk about it, and you share your insights and your thoughts, and at the end of the day, like, that's how we all grow together. Like the boat ramp incident, like I never thought about slipping and hitting my head. I knew it hurt my hip, but
right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So then you, after our trip, you beat the bank for a little while.
Yeah.
And then you decided to get a kayak.
Yeah. I got a Vibe Seaghost 130 paddle kayak, and the first season just bare bones kayak, and bought a little Garmin fish finder, and paddled around, and just kind of felt my way. It was near the end of the season, so I think I might have gone out maybe 2 or 3 times that year, and just kind of got a feel for the kayak, figured out what it was that I needed, how I wanted to situate things, and then I spent that next winter, kind of planning and preparing for how we were going to rig that kayak. And you rigged out the kayak for me, and now it's loaded with running lights and got a spotlight on the front and green lights underneath the body. I don't know if you've got a video of it. I don't have one, but if you do, that would be great to show everyone. It's I'm running a 55-pound thrust horse, or a 55-pound thrust Minn Kota trolling motor on the back. When I first got the kayak, for those of you who are kayak anglers, that until you've got a little bit of time in the seat, you're a little unsteady, and in fact, the first time I went out on Lake Erie was with you, and I think it might have been the first trip of the season, was with you, and after we got it rigged out, and after about 15 minutes, I was thinking, man, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get comfortable in this thing. I felt like I was going to tip all the time. And by the end of the trip, I felt like I was kind of in the pocket. And of course, every time you go out from there, you just get more and more comfortable. One of the things that that I wish I had done earlier, I fished that whole first season and didn't know how to. I thought I knew how, but I wasn't certain to get back in my kayak on my own. And I didn't spend the time practicing re-entry until the end of the season, when you and I went out, and you kind of gave me a little seminar on re-entry and cold water submersion and that kind of thing. But anybody that is starting out in kayaking, I would recommend 2 things. One, don't worry about the gear. All you need is a kayak and a paddle, or a pedal if you're using a pedal kayak, and a fishing rod and a life jacket. You have to have a life jacket, obviously, and a whistle. But don't overthink all the gear. You can get completely inundated. There's so many videos out there on YouTube, and there's so much information on the internet with all these DIY rigging, and there's tons and tons of stuff that you can do to your kayak, and all that stuff is great. And I recommend a lot of those things. I use a lot of those things, but it's important not to get obsessed with that in the beginning. And somebody, I think it was you, Chuck, you gave me that advice in the beginning. You're like, don't worry about rigging out. You're going to learn what you want and the way you want it set up once you get out there a couple of times. And
Exactly.
That was great advice, because, you can spend a ton of money chasing after all these things, and you don't really know what you want until you're out there fishing. And a lot of it depends on the application, what species you're targeting, and look, I'm on Facebook, easy to reach. If anybody ever has any questions or needs some advice on something, I'm certainly not an expert. I've only been doing this a couple of years, but I'll be happy to provide you with any advice I've got.
Yeah, Chris is a good dude. He's a local guy, lives right here in Lakewood, I believe, right?
Avon Lake, yeah.
Avon Lake. And favorite species is catfish. So
yeah,
if you're looking to get out and do some catfishing, and definitely has a little bit of Lake Erie experience. We've been out, 6 or 8 times?
Yeah, probably. Like yeah, we've been out 6 or 8 times, I would say, in Lake Erie or Rocky River, between the two. And certainly that's not my it's not my comfort zone yet. Now, I was able to use one of Chuck's Native Titan X kayaks the last time we went out. What was that? We went out October, and I fell in love with that thing.
Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, there it is. And I'm actually going to buy one here at some point in the next, hopefully, few weeks to a month. I've decided to go ahead and buy a Native Titan X and put a Torpedo on there. Just bite the bullet all at once and go all in. I've, like I said, been doing it long enough now that I kind of know what I want. And that Sea Ghost I'm going to keep for my son. He's getting a little bit older now, and I'm going to try to get him into it a little bit. So
there you go. And full transparency, I mean, you see Chris's projection into the Native Titan X with a motor on the back. I mean, not everybody wants to jump into something like that. I definitely didn't. I started out in Wilderness Systems Pungo 140. So, a lot of the instability feeling that you were talking about in the Vibe Sea Ghost, I had in the Pungo. And honestly, I think coming from a paddle discipline or that style of kayak is really going to teach you a lot of stability along the way, which we learned when we went out and did your stability testing. But before we get into that, by the way, for those of you that have been joining in with us, you probably noticed the fisherman's light. Now it's on control. So whenever your question pops in the feed, Phil pops it up there. That way we know we're just going to pause, bring up the question, and then we'll go on to the reentry. What we got, Phil? James says, Chris, how long did it take you to get used to your kayak?
That's a great question. So I first started taking the first couple of trips that I went out. I went on Black River just because I knew that there wasn't a whole lot of boat traffic. There wasn't going to be, I wasn't going to have to contend with many wakes. That was the first season. I kind of cut my teeth there the first 2 or 3 trips. And then I moved over to Lake Ladue, which is an inland lake. And there's no motor vessel, no motorboats allowed there. And that is a really good lake for you to kind of learn on, because it's protected enough from the wind that you're not going to have significant chop. But depending upon the conditions, you can get it can get a little bit rough out there. Not anything that's going to throw you, at least nothing that I've experienced is going to throw me out of the boat, but it's going to help you learn that stability. I would say I was still uncomfortable. I had probably had the boat maybe 6 months before I really started getting what I would say comfortable in it. But I didn't really get, so there's a point where Chuck uses this term a lot. I've heard him use it a few times. You get intimate with the boat. And the first time I heard him say that, I was like, that'll never happen with me. I don't even understand the concept. But once it happens, you know it. And there's just this, you just get kind of like a reflex, and you understand which way the boat's going to roll and the way you need to move to stay upright. And I would say for me, that happened after about a full year. And it really happened the day that Chuck and I went out. We went out on Rocky River one day and fished for, I don't know, a few hours. It was pretty cold. I think it was November. And we went out for a few hours and fished, and the leaves were really bad in the river, and we were fighting the leaves more than we were catching fish. And we had been talking about doing this re-entry training, and so we took the opportunity for me to just jump out in the water and climb back in the boat, and I walked all over the boat and went stern and forward. And in that, I don't know, how long did we do that for? Maybe an hour, probably?
1 to 2 hours.
Okay.
I will say I've never seen anybody attempt it as long as you did. Usually most people, they figure it out. They do it a few times. They look at me, they're like, we good? I'm like, we're good. And with you, you were just obsessed, and it was so cool to I actually have a video I'll pull up. It was so cool to watch that. And I didn't video the whole time because obviously, I'm paying attention and trying to give instruction and stuff like that.
Once you get up there, you just want to kick as hard as you can. Nice job. Yeah. How'd that water feel?
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to point out, I wish I would have shortened that clip. Sorry about that. By the end, Chris is standing up on a Vibe Seaghost 130. Anybody that's been in there knows it's not a bad kayak. It's a good starter kayak, but it's not the most stable, which that's fine depending on the situation that you're looking for. But by the end, Chris was standing up using the kayak as a paddleboard. In windy situations, and sometimes Rocky River does get a little bit of chop, so it wasn't the easiest situation, but yeah.
So, to answer your question, it was after that experience there that I really became comfortable, and I got the confidence that no matter what the situation was, I could climb all over that boat. And if I was to fall in, I felt like, as long as I wasn't in a 30-mile-an-hour gust and, 4-foot waves, I was going to be able to get back in my boat. I shared with Chuck that it was early this spring. I was fishing on Ladue, and I had I'd gotten my line tangled up in my prop. And I climbed to the back of the boat and raised my motor and got the line out of the prop. on that vibe, and the whole aft of the boat was down in the water. And when I finally got it out, I'm not a light guy, and I was pushing the whole stern of the boat down in the water. And when I got it out, I thought I was going to go in, but I managed to stay on top and climb back to the front. And I was so happy that I was able to do that. I text Chuck probably, I don't know, within just a couple of minutes, and shared with you what had happened. But there's no way that I would have been able to do that if we hadn't spent that time out on Rocky River. The great thing about, being out with Chuck is, whether you go out for a 6-hour trip and you just, hang out on Lake Erie and he teaches you about kayak fishing and the different techniques and the safety stuff that you learn, or whether you're doing, cold water or just water re-entry, the amount that you can learn from Chuck in a short period of time is incredible. I feel like every time I go out with Chuck, even now, a 6-hour trip, I learn more than I would have learned, in 2, 3, 4 months, or maybe, actually in the beginning, a 6-hour trip, I probably learned what it would take me to, a year to learn on my own, or maybe even more. I don't know, 2, 3 years potentially. It's just anybody that's starting out new, highly recommend booking a trip with Chuck. It's an experience you won't forget. And he shares everything. There's no secrets with this guy. A lot of guides don't tell you their secret sauce. He'll show you his, well, maybe I shouldn't share this. I don't know. But, he's shown me his fish finder, and, he's got thousands of fish that he's caught in Lake Erie, and, showed me where those fish were before. And that's, people don't do that kind of thing, or a lot of people don't. That's a something special.
It all comes down to just trying to educate, right? And I believe generally when I show my fish finder like that, what I'm trying to explain is how the fish pick 10% of the water. 90% of the fish is going to be in 10% of the water. So when you look at my waypoints on my fish finder, you can see, wow, there's 100 catches here. What is it? It's a point, it's a hump, it's a reef, it's some kind of structure that's drawing them in, right? And then you maybe have a little bit of structure here, but there's 5 or 10 catches in between, and then you have another strip where maybe there's another big group of catches, and what that does is it helps you break down the map and identify what kind of structure these fish like, especially in a situation where you're just fishing drop-offs and points, and there's not really any physical structure like trees and stuff like that down there. For the most part, there's rock piles and stuff, but at the end of the day, I enjoy watching the angler evolve over the day, and sharing my passion with them. And like it's an incredible experience. Even for me, like I've caught so many fish, I don't need to go out and catch a fish. I don't even fish on the guide trips unless my client's like, dude, why are you not fishing? At the end of the day, it's just sharing the wisdom and sharing the passion and sharing the happiness and the excitement. And one thing I wanted to just pick on your buddy real quick, move on and I forget.
Chad?
This was Chad. So Chad showed up terrified. This guy was terrified, and his other 3 buddies were making him go kayak fishing on Lake Erie nonetheless. And he was just terrified. He wanted to run away, but he couldn't. So I put him in Old Town Sportsman 120. It's not as fast as the 132 that I was running back then, but it's a little bit more stable. Has a little bit more primary stability. And he was struggling. He did get comfortable fairly quickly, surprisingly, but he was struggling to catch fish. So I hooked up to him, and it was this one. See, I'm towing him there with the torpedo, and I had a line out hooked into ended up being a sheephead, unfortunately, but handed him over the rod and he got to reel that in. So that was pretty cool. You know, hey, at the end of the day, we're all great at certain things. We suck at others.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Hey,
We've had hours of fun giving Chad a hard time about that. Every once in a while, picture resurfaces of him being pulled by you, and we have a little bit of fun with it. He had just had shoulder surgery, like, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks before. And the reason he was so worried was he kept saying, what if I get knocked off into Lake Erie, there's no way I'm going to be able to get back in the boat, you know? But he did okay. Thanks to you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was a great time. Looks like we got a question. James says, Chuck, will you be at the Columbus Fishing Expo? If so, I'd like to see your safety gear other than your PFD. Yep, I will be in Columbus all 3 days. I have the dry suit and all my safety gear and all that stuff with me as well. And the kayak set up in the booth. I don't have the presentation schedule yet, but I'll be presenting as well. Yeah, that was a cool trip. You know, and my favorite was probably the last trip, you know, with the Titan X, because you just looked so comfortable, you know, and I've been able to see your confidence grow over the last couple of years in the Vibe Sea Ghost, but it still didn't, you know, you still kind of felt iffy.
Yeah.
Or at least appeared that way. But in the Titan X, you know, you just seem super comfortable, and you know, you could actually enjoy the trip. And I mean, you always want to take safety into consideration, you know. That is always the most important thing. I always say fishing is life, but safety comes first. But I know Chris is he's pretty close to being just as safe as me. Only reason not is because he doesn't have all the information, right? But it was a really cool trip. And then I remember you sent me a text a couple of weeks later, and you're like, you know, I can't tell people this because they just wouldn't understand, but I can tell you. And I remember thinking, oh boy. And you're like, man, I was up till 3 a.m. last night. Couldn't stop thinking of the Titan X.
Yeah, that's true. I've woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning a few times dreaming about the Titan X since that trip. You know, it put a fire in my belly, and I've got to have one now. So I am super excited about that, and can't wait to get it rigged out and get it out on Lake Erie.
Yeah, and,
open up.
Go ahead.
You know, you had said earlier my favorite species is catfish, and it is catfish, I would say, for a couple of reasons. One, I grew up, you know, I had said at the beginning, I grew up fishing primarily farm ponds and small bodies of water and the Ohio River, but it was mainly all, you know, catfish or largemouth bass. Those were the two predominant species that we had. And when I moved here, I learned about the channel catfish on Sandusky Bay. It was actually my buddy Brett, one of the guys that went out on the trip with us. He called me one day and said, do you realize that you're sitting on world-class channel catfish up, you know, Sandusky Bay is right around the corner from where you're at. And there's monster channel catfish up there. And so I started doing a little bit of research. That was the wintertime. In fact, I think that was about this time last year that he had told me about that. Maybe a little bit, maybe it was the previous winter. I'm not sure. But anyway, I started doing a little bit of research and, you know, figuring out what baits work best, and studied the map a little bit to try to figure out what locations would be best to fish. And I have been now I've not caught any of the big 30 pounders, you know. Well, I say I haven't caught any of the 30 pounders. I caught one this summer. I didn't have a scale or a measuring board with me, but I used my boot to measure this thing, and my boot's about 13 inches long, and it was 3 boot lengths. So that's, it may not have been a 39-inch catfish, but it was really close. It was somewhere, I would say, between 35, 36 inches and 39, 40 inches, maybe even. But it wasn't super fat, so I don't know how much it would have weighed. I'm guessing somewhere in the 20s. But I've caught a number of 15 pounders out of there over the last year and a half or so. My favorite one was just this last summer, and I had a bait suspended over the side of my boat, and a couple cast it out with like Santee Cooper rigs. I was anchored up in about 10 feet of water next to the bridge there, the railroad tracks. And the bait fish kept knocking at my bait that I had suspended. They were just tapping it, and it was aggravating me. And so I pulled it in, and I took this little ultralight rod that I had with a crappie jig on it that I had casted around for some bait fish. And I cut a small piece. I'm talking like it was less than the size of a dime of chicken breast, which I'll get to in a minute. But I cut this piece of chicken breast and dropped it over the side of the boat. No weight, nothing, just 6-pound test line on it was an ultralight rod with 1,000 series reel. And I just set it in the rod holder and thought, well, whatever's pecking at my bait down there, I'm going to catch it and see what it is. And it stopped, but I kept it down there. And I don't know, 10 minutes go by, and all of a sudden my rod just doubles over. I grab it, and I end up fighting this fish for, I think it was probably somewhere around 10 or 15 minutes. Finally got it in. Thankfully, I had a really good drag system on that little reel, and it was a 15-pound channel catfish that I brought in.
Nice.
That was my favorite fish of the season, But getting back to the chicken breast, if there are any catfishermen watching and you fish Sandusky Bay, I've tried shrimp. I know a lot of guys have a lot of luck with shrimp up there. And, other people use cut bait. I've tried shrimp, cut bait, live bait, even night crawlers, and nothing for me works as well as chicken breast. I ran into a guy up there at Sandusky Bay. I don't know. I think I was just scouting the area out maybe a couple of years ago. And I just started talking with him. He had caught a big 17 or 18-pound channel catfish. And I asked him what he was using. And he told me chicken breast was the best bait. And I didn't really believe him because everything I'd seen on YouTube pointed me in the direction of shrimp. And so I fished for, I don't know, I probably went up there 4 or 5 times and never used chicken breast. And then finally, I went up there with some chicken breast, and I just, wore them out. And I've been a chicken breast fan ever since, and it hasn't done me wrong.
Yeah, I've heard people use chicken liver before.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't chicken breast? So
yeah, I used chicken liver growing up a lot, but anyway.
I know some of the catfishermen will say that, the stinkier the better. So they'll let it sit out for a few days.
Yeah. I do believe that there's something to that. I have not here, but there was a farm pond back where I grew up that one of my relatives owned, and it was full of mussels. It was close to the Ohio River, and I guess maybe the Ohio River had overflowed at some point, and a mussel bed had started in this. It was really almost like a small lake. It was a huge pond. And one time the water was really low, and there were a bunch of these dead mussels in the shallows of the water or in the mud. And I went out there and got these mussels, and they were rancid. And that was probably the most successful catfishing day I've ever had. Within just a few seconds of the bait hitting the water, they were just gone with it. If I remember right, I fished there for probably 4 or 5 hours, and I couldn't keep a line in the water, very long at all. So I think there is something to that. I don't do that now. The only thing I do as far as stink bait is concerned is I use some of that fish attractant oil that, Bass Pro sells some catfish oil, and I will soak my chicken breast in that sometimes. And I've used garlic and this other oil, and I can't think of what it's called. It might be called anise or something like that. It smells like licorice. I've used that, but nothing has done as well as just, what's that?
Antsy.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. But yeah, chicken breast by itself really for me has been the best up there, at least,
Yeah. We do have a couple of questions. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Questions.
What we got, Phil? Have you ever tried cocktail shrimp? Does good at Indian Lake.
Cocktail shrimp. I have never tried the boiled cocktail shrimp ready to eat. It's funny you say that. I was watching a video the other day, and there was a guy that was using those, and he was talking about how they stay on the hook a little bit longer, a little bit better. So that's something I might try. It's a good idea.
Another thing that you can do if you have trouble with the bait staying on the hook, and you're not really looking for a presentation or a profile, right?
Right.
It's just the scent. You could take pantyhose or the mesh that they use for tying up egg sacs.
Yeah.
And just tie it up and hook your hook like that, and it'll keep that in that little sack there.
That's a good idea as well. Yeah. I've heard about these guys tearing them up there with the shrimp, but that's the problem. I can't keep the shrimp on my line, but the boiled shrimp that are for shrimp cocktail is a good idea.
And we got one more question from Drama Outdoors. He wants to know, sorry, I can read it better over here. Plain, or do you use flavor for the chicken, like Kool-Aid or anything like that?
I've tried the Kool-Aid and the garlic, but I have caught fish on the Kool-Aid, but I seem to do better. I've used the cherry Kool-Aid with the garlic, the plain chicken breast, and the chicken breast with the oil all at the same time. And the plain chicken breast, for me, at least on Sandusky Bay, always outperforms the others, with the oil being the next. And I don't remember if I have caught a few fish on the garlic and the Kool-Aid, but nowhere near like I do with the plain chicken breast or the chicken breast with that attractant on it.
Right.
And forgive me, I don't know what the name of the attractant is, but they sell it in the Catfish area at Bass Pro here in Avon.
Gotcha.
But go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, the thing that I'm most excited about for this season is with this. Once I get this native Titan X, I feel like it opens up an opportunity for me to really get out in Lake Erie and get comfortable, chase walleye, walleye. This is, talk about world-class channel catfishing. This is world-class walleye fishing as well. And I've never, aside from when I go with you, I've always been too afraid to get out there in the Seaghost by myself. Now, would I get out there now? I'm pretty comfortable in the Seaghost to the point where I would feel pretty good getting out in the water getting out on Lake Erie on that. But the profile is so much lower on that boat than a Titan X. The Titan X, you're sitting up out of the water much higher. You're much more visible. And I just feel more comfortable in the big water in that boat. And I don't worry one bit. I mean, obviously I have to get used to that boat, but I'm not worried one bit about going out there, by myself in that this season.
Right. And I mean, just, me as an outsider, I I think you'd be just fine out there with the Vibe Sea Ghost on calmer days. But you definitely have the skills and the knowledge, and your re-entry is spot on. So I feel personally like you could handle pretty much anything that you'd have to deal with out there, and you're smart enough not to go out on a day that you shouldn't be out there.
Yeah.
The tight necks just kind of makes everything a little bit more comfortable, maybe a little bit more roomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool boat, and it's not for everybody. I mean, for big water, tight necks is a great kayak. If you're fishing like creeks and streams and stuff like that, the tight necks is probably the last kayak you want, because it's 170 pounds. It's heavy. So something smaller, but like you were saying in the beginning, it's all about the right boat, the right setup, the right rig, because my rig works perfect for what I do. It's not going to be the same for somebody else that's not trying to do exactly what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. So true.
Yeah. That's cool. What else we got here? So we talked about re-entry, talked about gear. So if you were going to give some advice for people considering to get into kayak fishing, or people just considering to get into fishing in general, because we have world-class fishery. I mean, aside from the walleye, the catfish, there's smallmouth, yellow perch, steelhead, long-nosed gar, world-class catfish. We even have flatheads in Cuyahoga River. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did know that. I just found that out recently, actually. But
maybe I texted you.
Yeah, it may have been you that I found out from, but yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of advice would you give?
I would say, don't overthink it. And the main thing is get out on the water, especially if you're going to be kayak fishing. Everybody's budget's different, and there are all different kinds of kayaks that you can get at various, price ranges. You don't have to have the best kayak on the market to get started. It's a progression. I started, like I said, in the Vibe Sea Ghost, and I got it on a great, it was a great one of these, I guess, maybe end of the season type sale deals. And that's what Chuck and my other buddy Brett, they had both given me that advice. Like, don't worry about what you're getting, just get something and get started. And like Chuck was saying in the beginning, it pays, in my opinion, to get a less stable kayak in the beginning. Sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm really grateful that I started off in a Vibe Sea Ghost 130. It tracks really well. It's a fast boat, and it's stable, but the secondary stability, it takes a little bit for that secondary stability to kick in. And it takes a while for you to learn how to use the kayak to your advantage, to the best of its ability, I suppose. And but the what you learn from the challenges of trying to figure out how to operate your new, not so quite stable kayak will pay off in the long run. You get on a bigger boat, you upgrade a few years later, and you get, a native or an Old Town or something like that. You're going to be that much better of a kayak angler because you got that other experience. Same thing with the gear. You don't have to get, whether you're kayak fishing or you're fishing for the bank, you don't have to have the best gear either. I fished with a Zebco 33 for several years whenever I was growing up. And, that's about as inexpensive of a decent rod and reel set that you can get. Don't worry about the brand. Don't worry. Just get out on the water and try it out. Watch some videos. Chuck always says, think like a fish, catch fish. And, there's a wealth of knowledge out there that is accessible, free of charge. There's a lot of really smart anglers, Chuck being one of them. He's got a ton of, phenomenal videos out there on YouTube that I would recommend you checking out, especially, as far as cold water safety is concerned. It doesn't get any better than Chuck Earls, in my opinion. That guy, Chuck, you understand cold water safety better than anyone. And I've watched, tons of videos out there. So I would highly recommend seeing some of his stuff, and just get out there and pay attention to what you're doing. And if you're not catching them, chances are you're not in the right spot. Like Chuck said, 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water. And once you figure out how to target those different spots in the water, you're going to put fish on the bank or in the boat. Navionics, you can get a Navionics subscription, which is an app. If you're going to be on bigger water, it's a great resource to understand points and humps and, structure within the water from where you might target fish. So I would highly recommend getting that if you're really serious about getting into it. It's kind of like having a little fish finder on your iPhone.
Exactly. Even if you're not on big water, if you're on a small body of water and they have the mapping, you can see what's actually going on and try to break down the water, even from your couch. Like I do that a lot of times for a tournament, or if I'm going to a new area or something, or going to an area I haven't fished in a while. I just go through and I focus on the structure and that map off the water. That way, when I'm on the water, I can just focus on the fish. So, it's a great resource. Unfortunately, they have raised the price a little bit. I believe it was $20 when I started. It's $50 now.
Yeah.
Per year. So it's just $50 one time. But you can mark waypoints on there. You can put notes. I believe you can even take a picture of a fish and tag it to that waypoint. So it's really cool, and it's a cheap, think about it, $50 for an app versus, maybe you don't have $600-700 to invest in a fish finder yet, or you don't know what you want.
Yep. And they even offer if you've got a computer, they offer a free version on the web, right?
Yep. Yes, you can always do that research.
Yeah, you can do the pre-trip research there. You can't take it with you, obviously, but
yeah. Well, you can.
Oh, yeah, I guess you could.
If you have a cheap laptop, or they do have I guess you could take a tablet. And when I was selling boats for your marine sales, a lot of these guys would get this waterproof tablet case. I forget who made it, but it was mounted to a ram ball, so you can actually mount the tablet outside of the pilot house. Any of that stuff. It was pretty cool. I think we have Drama Outdoors says, have either of you catfished the Cuyahoga River from a kayak? I've never catfished the Cuyahoga River. I have fished for steelhead and smallmouth in there. I really only found out about the flathead in there on the Michael Durkalek episode. So haven't really had a reason to target the catfish there, but now I do. What about you?
Nope, I've never fished it. Just learned about flathead being in there just recently. And like I said, I don't remember who. It might have been you that told me that. I think it was you, actually. But I will probably plan a trip at some point this spring or summer,
Yeah, it's close. We're pretty lucky. We're halfway in between the Rocky River and the Black River, and super close to the lake.
Yeah.
James said, I started out in an Ascend kayak. Now got a Three Waters Big Fish 108. And it's an evolution. I'm a big fan of, any kayak or any vessel that gets you on the water safely is a good vessel, a good kayak. At the end of the day, who cares about branding or anything like that? If that's the only thing that you can get in your budget, get out there, enjoy it, learn some things. And like you said, Chris, one of the best things that ever happened to me was starting out in the Wilderness Systems Pungo 140, because it's kind of designed as a touring kayak. It's long, it's narrow, it's not the most stable. It did have front and back bulkheads, so it was safe to be on big water. But there was a lot of things that I learned from that kayak, from being out there paddling in a sit-inside kayak or in something that's not as stable, that I never would have learned if I would have just jumped into, say like the Big Water 132.
Yeah. Did you ever get knocked out of that thing in Lake Erie?
Which one? The Pungo?
Yeah.
Nope, not on accident. I did jump out of it a bunch of times. Ironically, okay, let me take that back. There was one time on the Rocky River. In the summertime, it's pretty busy. I'm usually on the go, running trips all the time, and I feel like my dog doesn't get enough adventure, so sometimes when I'm so busy, I feel guilty. So I'm like, I'll take Brian down to the river. So I get the kayak in there, and I don't even get 15 feet from the shore, and he's already been in the water, 6 times. Like, throw the ball, barking at me, throw the ball. I throw the ball, he jumps in, I pull him back in, and in the sit-in, he's bringing water in every time. So the next time he did it, I grabbed him, and I'm like, Brian, like, let's get down the river. So I grabbed him and tried to put him behind me on the like, it had kind of like a little deck on the back, kind of. And as soon as I went sideways, flipped right over. So,
but that was fun trying to get back in that thing.
What's that?
I said, I bet it was fun trying to get back in that thing.
It's not so bad. The thing with sit inside kayaks is you have to have an ability to pump it out. Once you flood that kayak, that cockpit, if it's above the water surface, it's going to be very unstable. So without getting that water out, you try to get back on, it'll just throw you back over the other side. Kind of like, if you end up getting a leak or a crack or anything like that in your sit on top kayak, having that bilge pump to pump it out, because there's a point where you get too much water, that water moves to one side and the kayak doesn't react how you're anticipating, and maybe it just rolls you over,
Yeah.
Looks like we got one more question here. Drum Outdoors says, you mentioned the flatheads. Call my personal best flathead from the bank this last fall. Want to try kayak it more. I have a time or two, but being passed by a 100-foot cargo ship when you're in a 12-foot piece of plastic is very intimidating, actually. There is a couple of safety tips that I can give you on that. So there's an app, I believe it's called, let me look it up. Where did it go? I haven't used it in a while. It's got to download it before to give me the name, but it's Marine Traffic Live or something. Yeah. Kind of looks like that. I know you can't really see that very good. But the cool thing about this is when you're on the Cuyahoga River, you can open this up and see, I don't know if you can see that, but you see those little dots on there. Those are boats. And if we click on them, it'll tell us what it is. And you can open it up and it'll give you more, more specific data. The nice thing about this, you can track whether there's a vessel coming in. You can kind of look at the schedule and make sure that you're not just surprised by a 100-foot, freighter that's coming through that river, because there are some tight spots where that freighter's making some maneuvers that you don't want to really be anywhere near it.
Good
And it's
advice.
also cool when you're offshore and maybe you see something in the distance that's just cool, or a different looking vessel. Like when Noah was here doing the chart plotting, the scanning, it was pretty cool. You just open up your map and it'll show you whatever boats in the area. Yeah, and the other thing about the Cuyahoga River is there's a lot of no man's land. There's a lot of spots that like you're not getting out if you fall in, because you have those high corrugated metal walls. So just get familiar with the river, and if something does go bad, know where you have to go. There's got to be somewhere. Like there's some spots on the Cuyahoga where you branch off, where maybe you get somewhere where there's a low dock or somewhere you can climb up. Just always have that emergency plan. Cool.
Good. Yeah. Good advice.
We're about a minute 10 or an hour 10 in. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we covered everything.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
It's
a
been
good
fun.
episode.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it was great just watching you evolve over the last couple of years. It's really been awesome. If you guys are wondering what I'm playing with, it is actually a Lake Erie rock. Ironically form fitted to my thumb. It just fits perfect in my hand. I don't know. Sometimes you just have to have a piece of Lake Erie with you. But on that note, we'll go ahead and end this stream. We'll be back next Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for another episode of the Angler's Wisdom Podcast. Now get out there and catch a fish.